Story 1. The air in the superstitions doesn't move. It hangs, thick and heavy, like a shroud shimmering with heat. I'd hiked these mountains a dozen times, thought I knew their moods. I respected them, but I didn't fear them. Not like the old-timers in Apache Junction, the ones with sun-cured skin and eyes that held the desert's vast emptiness. They'd talk in low voices about the Dutchman's curse, about the mountains swallowing people whole. I always just nodded, a half smile on my face. To me, it was just rock and heat and agave. My goal this time was Weaver's Needle, a spire of volcanic rock that gouges the sky. My grandfather, a man obsessed with the lost Dutchman legend, had filled notebooks with maps and theories, all centering on the needle's afternoon shadow. He'd vanished out here 30 years ago. I wasn't looking for gold or closure. I was just tracing a ghost, trying to understand the obsession that consumed him. The first day was normal. Brutal, but normal. The sun was a physical weight on my shoulders. The only sounds were the crunch of my boots on the gravelly trail and the frantic thrum of my own heart. By late afternoon, I noticed the silence. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of nature. It was an absolute void. No birds, no cicadas, not even the whisper of wind through the skeletal branches of the Palo Verde. The silence had a pressure to it, like being deep underwater. That's when I saw the first one. Not a person, but a landmark. Off the trail, perched impossibly on a sheer rock face, was a stack of dark, flat stones. It wasn't a cairn built by hikers. It was too tall, too slender, almost like a crude sculpture of a man. It looked ancient and wrong. I took a picture, but a strange reluctance made my hand tremble. It felt like I was trespassing. A few hours later, I saw another one, on a different ridge, silhouetted against the bleeding orange of the sunset. Identical to the first. I checked my map. There were no marked formations like that. I brushed it off as a trick of the light, a symptom of dehydration setting in. The second day, the mountain began to play with me. My compass started spinning lazily, the needle unable to find north. My GPS flickered, showing my location miles away in the middle of a reservoir. I wasn't panicked. I knew the terrain, knew the sun's path. But a cold knot was tightening in my gut. I decided to head back to the trailhead, cutting the trip short. As I crested a ridge, I saw him. Far below, in the basin I'd just crossed, was a figure. He was dressed in what looked like old-fashioned prospecting gear. A wide-brimmed hat, dark canvas clothes. He was moving slowly, not with a backpacker's steady gait, but with a shambling, aimless shuffle, his head down. I shouted, waving my arms. He didn't look up. He just continued his slow, meandering path until he disappeared behind a swell of scorched rock. The sight was unnerving. Nobody hikes out here in clothes like that, not in this heat. You'd cook. I pushed on, my thirst now a burning panic. The landscape began to feel cyclical. The same bleached cola cactus, the same towering saguaro with a missing arm, the same ominous stone sentinel watching from a distant peak. I was walking in circles. The sun hammered down, and the world dissolved into a blinding white-hot haze. I stumbled into the shade of a shallow cave, my body screaming for relief. The air inside was cool and still. As my eyes adjusted, I saw something in the corner. A rusted tin canteen and a small leather-bound journal, its pages warped and stiff. My blood went cold. I recognized the tooling on the leather. It was my grandfather's. I opened it with shaking hands. The last few entries were nearly illegible, the handwriting a panicked scrawl. They don't walk. They wait. The stone men watch me. At night I see their fires, but there is no wood. The old man is with them now. He followed me for days. Said the mountain doesn't give back what it takes. The last entry was just 2 words. I'm home. A sound from the mouth of the cave made me look up. On the opposite ridge, outlined against the deep purple of twilight, a figure stood. It was the prospector I'd seen earlier. But he wasn't alone. Another figure stood beside him, and another. They weren't moving. They were just standing there, dark and still, watching the cave, watching me. Then I saw it. One of them, slightly taller than the others, was wearing a faded plaid shirt. It was the same shirt my grandfather was wearing in the last photograph ever taken of him. He wasn't looking at me with malice, or any emotion at all. He was just there. A silent part of the landscape, a guardian. I scrambled back into the cave, heart hammering against my ribs. I'm writing this on my phone, the battery at 2%. The figures are still there. They haven't moved. The silence is back, heavier than ever. But I understand now. My grandfather didn't get lost. The prospector wasn't a mirage. The mountain doesn't kill you. It claims you. It gives you a new job. For some reason, as I sit here waiting for the sun to rise, or for them to finally move, I can't shake the feeling that I already know what my post will be. I keep looking at my hands, half expecting to see them turning to stone. Story 2. The heat in the Superstition Mountains isn't just hot. It's a physical presence. It presses down on you, a suffocating blanket woven from silence and sun. They say the mountains don't want you here, and out here, you believe it. The silence isn't peaceful. It's the sound of a predator holding its breath. My grandfather was one of the ones the mountains took. He wasn't a fool. He was a geologist, a man of rock and reason. But the legend of the lost Dutchman's mine got its hooks in him. He vanished in '98. They found his truck parked at the Peralta trailhead, a half-empty canteen on the passenger seat. That was it. No note, no body, nothing. 20 years later, I was standing in the same spot, the same merciless sun beating down on my own neck. I wasn't looking for gold. I was looking for an answer, some final piece to a story that had haunted my family for 2 decades. In his study, tucked inside a dusty copy of a book about Apache folklore, I'd found his last map. It was covered in frantic scribbles, but one annotation was circled several times. The weaver's needle is a lie. The true marker is the stone cipher. I'd spent months researching that phrase. It wasn't on any official map, but in obscure forums dedicated to the Dutchman's curse, I found whispers of a strange rock formation deep in a nameless canyon, a wall of basalt that, from a certain angle at a certain time of day, looked like a scramble of indecipherable characters. 3 days in, the landscape had stripped me down to my most basic functions: drink, walk, endure. The world had shrunk to the crunch of my boots on gravel and the rasp of my own breathing. The saguaros stood like silent, skeletal sentinels, their arms raised in permanent surrender to the sky. There were no birds, no insects, just the hiss of the wind through brittle bush. That's when I first saw them. On a high, distant ridge, silhouetted against the searing blue, were 2 figures. They were impossibly still. Not hikers resting. There was a rigid, unnatural quality to their posture. I raised my binoculars, my hands shaking slightly from dehydration. They were just shapes. No color, no discernible features, just stark black cutouts against the sky. I told myself it was the heat playing tricks, a mirage born of sunstroke and solitude. But as I watched, a third figure joined them, appearing from behind a rock as if it had simply materialized from the stone itself. They didn't move. They just stood there, watching my progress. An ancient primal fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the haze of the heat. I was being observed. I pushed on, trying to ignore the prickling on my neck. I found the canyon from my grandfather's map late in the afternoon, and there it was, the stone cipher. It was breathtaking and deeply unnerving. A sheer cliff face was fractured with thousands of vertical cracks, and as the sun began to dip, the shadows they cast formed what looked like a sprawling alien script. It felt like stumbling upon something that should have remained hidden forever. At the base of the cliff, tucked into a shallow overhang, was a small, protected space, and inside, a weathered leather satchel, my grandfather's. My heart hammered against my ribs. I tore it open. Inside was his journal. The last few pages were filled with the same frantic scrawl as the map. Day 12. The sun knows my name. It speaks in the silence. The gold is a myth. The real treasure is a secret, and the mountain guards it with hunger. Day 14. The stone men are watching again. They don't have faces, but I feel their eyes. They don't walk, they simply are. Yesterday there were 2. Today there are 4. They are patient. Day 15. I understand now. The cipher isn't a map to a place. It's a key. It tells you how to see what's really here. The last entry was barely legible. The pencil strokes dug deep into the paper. Day 16. I saw one of them up close today. He was standing by the creek bed. So still. He looked just like me. A chill that had nothing to do with the coming night crept down my spine. My mouth was bone dry. I slowly closed the journal, my gaze drawn back towards the canyon rim I'd just ascended. The sun was a bloody smear on the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows that bled across the rock. On the ridge opposite me, the figures were still there. But now there were more of them. Maybe a dozen. Too many to be a trick of the light. And then, I saw it. I raised my binoculars again, my breath catching in my throat. One of the figures, standing slightly apart from the others, was no longer a featureless silhouette. The fading light caught it just right, illuminating a flash of color. A faded red flannel shirt, a worn denim jacket. It was the same outfit my grandfather was wearing in the last photograph ever taken of him. It, raised an arm, not in a wave, but in a slow, beckoning gesture, urging me to come deeper into the mountains. And I realized the truth, cold and absolute. The mountains don't just take you. They add you to their collection. They put you on the ridge to watch, to wait, to lure the next poor soul who comes looking. A pebble clattered somewhere behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting a frantic arc through the darkness. Standing not 20 feet away, at the base of the stone cipher, was another figure. It was tall and lean, wearing the same hiking gear I was. Its face was lost in the deep shadow cast by its cap, but I didn't need to see its eyes. I already knew whose they would be.